Days after his sessions, Phil would be hit by a heavy, suffocating dread. It arrived without warning, without a source, and without a clear trigger. He described the sensation as a quiet, terrifying detachment from his own surroundings, a loss of gravity, where his definition of what was real began to dissolve. These episodes followed regression hypnosis sessions with Dolores Cannon, where he recovered memories of visitations, non-human encounters he specifically refused to label as abductions. Confronting a memory that defies physical laws forces the mind to rebuild its entire perception of the world. Phil felt the very foundations of his belief system failing him as he tried to reconcile these events with his daily life. Phil was familiar with unusual concepts. He had spent years exploring past life regressions, but he viewed those distant lifetimes as harmless additions to his identity that remained safely removed from his current self. This timeline shows why these new memories felt different. The past lives remained isolated as distant nodes, but the visitation memories intersected directly with the present day, actively intruding on his waking life. Dolores had a private concern. Phil had struggled with suicidal ideation in the 1970s, and she worried that forcing his mind to reconcile these events might push him back toward that same edge. But walking away carried its own risks. The memories were already surfacing, and Phil felt a responsibility to see the process through. Stopping now would leave his sense of self in a state of permanent instability. To explain his distress, Phil described his psyche as being engaged in a violent internal civil war for control of his perception. The first combatant was the subconscious. It acted as a rigid gatekeeper, holding the raw data of the anomalous memories and carefully dictating exactly what information reached the surface. In this visualization, the subconscious vault holds the actual memory of the visitation. Raw and unfiltered, the memory contains no terror. In a trance state, Phil reported an inexplicable feeling of profound love toward the entities. The second combatant is the conscious mind. Phil described his waking awareness as infantile, a tool built for logic that has not yet grown to accommodate the existence of the non-human. When the subconscious attempts to pass the memory to the conscious mind, the reaction is violent. The waking mind recoils, questioning its own sanity as it tries to reject data it cannot explain. The formless dread Phil experienced was the result of this friction. It was the sensation of the conscious mind breaking down as it was forced to process the impossible. To justify the ongoing distress of his sessions, Phil compared the therapeutic process to treating a severe physical burn. In severe cases, doctors must repeatedly scrape away dead skin to prevent permanent, disfiguring scarring. Phil believed his conscious mind had to be repeatedly forced against the truth to clear the mental obstruction, regardless of the immediate pain. In this type of recovery, healing and comfort operate in direct opposition. To survive mentally intact, the patient must deliberately prioritize the resolution of the trauma over their own short-term ease. As the internal war continued, the subconscious found a secondary path. It bypassed the waking mind entirely and began leaking fragments of the trauma through Phil's dreams. These visceral dreams featured a tiny coiled wire inserted into his right tear duct and a long steel probe pushed deep into his chest. The dreams contained strange psychological anomalies. Phil saw another patient who was hysterical with fear, yet the moment the entities touched him, his face shifted into an expression of pleasure. The entities had simply suggested he feel joy instead of pain. These visions represent the human mind desperately trying to translate incomprehensible alien actions into recognizable earthly frameworks, like a sterile medical clinic. Reviewing Phil's progress, Dolores identified a clinical observation regarding how the mind protects its host during extreme stress. This pressure valve shows a dual mechanism at work. The subconscious blocks full access to protect the host from being overwhelmed, while the secondary valve allows a measured trickle of data through to force the necessary recovery. The human mind acts as a calibrated failsafe. It administers enough truth to force the psyche to heal, but cuts off the flow before the host reaches a state of total mental collapse. The final objective of this process is total psychological integration. This requires the conscious mind to accept the reality of the memory until it no longer causes a state of crisis. Dolores hypothesized that Phil's struggle was tied to his star child lineage. She believed his psyche lacked a history of earthly lifetimes, leaving him without the foundational grounding humans use to contextualize mortal fear. True recovery requires taking a reality-altering event and shrinking it into a manageable curiosity. Success is found when the memory is fully contained and no longer dictates the patient's daily reality.